Hey there, clariphiles and clarifilettes. It's been quite a while since I've been able to sit down and do a video, and believe me, it's not from lack of desire. I've really wanted to do it for a long time. It's just that everything seems to have militated against having the time to be able to do it, because it does take time to put these things together. This evening I'd like to talk to you about something that I'm not sure I've ever seen discussed, and that is, what is a professional clarinet? You know, St. Augustine said he knew what time was until he began to think about it. And when he thought about it, it became perfectly clear to him that he had no idea what time is. And I think if we all were put in the same situation as St. Augustine, I think we'd all come up with pretty much the same conclusion. Time is a mystery. But a professional clarinet need not be a mystery. There are objective criteria that we can use to evaluate whether a clarinet is truly worthy of being called a professional clarinet or not. Before we begin talking about those criteria, I'd like to just present a few other things for your consideration. For instance, the clarinet is an instrument that's used for performance. Now, a performance instrument is something that must go beyond appearance. We could have, for instance, a 2011 Lexus on the outside, and it would look great. And we sat down and turned on the engine, then we'd find out that we have a 1972 Gremlin engine and transmission in the car. And so it really doesn't drive. It really doesn't perform. So no matter how beautiful the Lexus looks on the outside, its performance tells you that the heart of it really is a 1972 Gremlin. And if you've ever ridden a 72 Gremlin, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so in order to evaluate whether a clarinet is really a professional clarinet, it's not enough to see that the appearance is really beautiful, that the finishing is really beautiful, and it's not enough to listen to the hype. We have to actually go in and go through the categories of performance. That's what the clarinet's for. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about these different categories and the ways that you can go about testing in these different categories. Well, like the Lord High Executioner in the Mikado, I've got a little list. And that little list will reveal the categories that the clarinet should be tested in order to decide whether the clarinet is really a professional clarinet or worthy of being called a professional clarinet. Let's take a look at those. What about the appearance of an instrument? Well, sometimes it's indicative of the quality of its actual performance, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very deceptive. For instance, what if I showed you these two trumpets, say trumpet A and trumpet B. Now, to the novice, to the person who really doesn't know much about music, they would, they would look at those trumpets and they would say, "Oh, the nice shiny one. That's obviously the better trumpet." But you know, the second trumpet is Wynton Marsalis's trumpet, and the first trumpet is actually the most basic student instrument. You must go beyond the eye candy and actually look at the actual performance. Probably the first thing that almost all clarinet players reflexively do, especially if they're testing the clarinet with someone else around, the first question they'll ask them is, how does it sound? Well, how it sounds is important, but there are many things that are much more important than that. Unfortunately, the testing of most clarinet players doesn't go really much further than how does it sound. And the idea of how it sounds doesn't go much further than how it sounds in a certain limited area. And it's all mixed up with really how it feels or how it blows in that limited area. The first thing about the tone of the clarinet is it should be beautiful. And we know that the mouthpiece and the reed have a great deal to do with that as well, and your concept. But the clarinet sound should not only be beautiful, but it should be consistent. It should be consistent from bottom to top. It should be very homogeneous in color and very homogeneous in shape. And these are very important criteria. There are some instruments that sound great in limited areas, but when you get in other areas of the instrument, we find that they're very, very lacking, not just in tone, but in other things as well. So when you're testing for tone, test the instrument throughout its registers and throughout its range, and see especially how well it matches from area to area. Very, very important. So testing for tone, even testing for tone, can be done in quite a bit of depth that most players usually don't do. Testing for tuning is probably the most important single thing on the clarinet, even though it's the thing that people often neglect to do altogether. The tuning is extremely critical. I remember as a starry-eyed graduate student, I heard the Boston Symphony play at Wolsey Hall, and I went backstage to corner Harold Wright, who was very reluctant usually to talk with anyone. But I cornered him, and he didn't have much choice but at least to share a few things. And I asked him what in particular he looked for in a mouthpiece. And I was ready for all kinds of hyperbole, of aesthetic pronouncements about the tone of the mouthpiece, but I didn't get any of that. I got a very hard-nosed answer. He looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "Tuning. The mouthpiece has got to tune." Well, that was a real shocker for me. Man, I was waiting for anything but that. But the more I thought about it, which took me quite a long time to really evaluate and understand the statement, the more I realized the tremendous wisdom of a statement like that. Many people try mouthpieces based just on the feel and the sound, but they never check the tuning until it's too late and they find that they're too flat to play in the group that they've been playing with, or that you're having sharpness problems. And I've got horror stories on both ends of that stick. So it's very, very important to test the tuning of the clarinet. Now, I have other videos that talk about how to test the clarinet, how to test the tuning, and the criteria, that the kind of ambiance that you need, and all that stuff. So I'm not going to go into that here. But it's extraordinarily critical to test the clarinet with the tuning. Very, very, and it should be probably the first thing you would consider, because no matter how well a clarinet sounds, no matter how evenly it plays, if the tuning is all over the place, then it's a clarinet that's going to be unusable for you. So I'll ask you to check throughout in those other videos. I can't remember what numbers they are, but other videos about testing tuning on the clarinet. And I think they will be very helpful to you in evaluating the tuning of any clarinet, a student, professional, or otherwise. The next thing you should test is the response and the resistance. Now you'll find that these are very related in terms related to tone in terms of consistency, because usually if response and resistance change, you'll find some kind of change in tone, in some aspect of the tone that you're going to have to make adjustments for. And the less changes there are in response and resistance, usually the more homogeneous the tone of the clarinet throughout, and the more predictable the response. You should especially check at how even the clarinet is over the middle break, from playing from open G up into the right-hand clarion, at all kinds of different dynamics. I know many people have instruments that they just go crazy when they have to play the Debussy Rhapsody, because the opening is so difficult to play because their instrument doesn't play evenly over the middle break. One of the other areas that's very, very critical is your solo register, which is your clarion register, playing from right hand to left hand, playing intervals and playing slow scales at all dynamics, and you should get an even response, an even color throughout both these hands. It's often the case that you'll find that a clarinet will blow with more resistance in one hand than the other. This is going to create a problem for you unless all you want to do with the clarinet is play mezzo forte. If you want to play forte and mezzo forte, it's going to be no problem. But if you want to play like an artist, you're going to have a clarinet whose hands are balanced in that critical clarion register, so you can play with confidence and ease. And the other thing is to check the response over the high break. The reason clarinets require half-holing over the high break, certain brands of clarinets require half-holing, is because there's too great a resistance differential in the clarinet. The upper clarion pitches will play too freely, and the lower altissimo pitches will play with too much resistance. So the half-holing helps you ease out of one resistance into the other. But if the clarinet is truly balanced, if the clarinet is truly even in resistance and response, there will be almost no need for any half-holing going to or from the third register, the altissimo register. All those things are very important. So resistance and response, that needs to be checked throughout. And there's one more critical area. We're going to talk about that next.